There are mornings in that courtroom that start like any other and end up being something else entirely. Something that the people present carry with them for a long time afterward, not because of what was decided, but because of what was said and how it was said and what it revealed about the people involved. This was one of those mornings. The name on the docket was not the name anyone recognized. It was a man named Trevor Solis, 43 years old, listed as a talent manager with a business address in Los Angeles, California. He was appearing on behalf of a matter connected to a visit his client had made to Providence 6 weeks earlier. His client was a musician, not a minor figure. Someone whose name would be recognized by most people under 40 in the country. Someone who filled arenas. Someone whose last album had debuted at #1 in 11 countries. Someone who, when they came to Providence for a single night to perform at a venue that had sold out in under 4 minutes, apparently treated the city the way certain people treat places they are only passing through. As scenery, as temporary, as somewhere that the usual considerations did not fully apply. The violations were numerous. A convoy of SUVs had parked in a no-parking zone for over 3 hours outside the venue during load-in. 2 of those vehicles had blocked a fire hydrant. 1 had partially obstructed a curb cut designated for wheelchair access. There were noise complaints filed against the venue that traced back to a sound check that began 2 hours before the permitted window and ran at volumes that exceeded the city ordinance by a measurable margin. And there was a separate incident involving a member of the entourage who had been cited for disorderly conduct outside a restaurant near the waterfront, a citation that had gone unanswered, which was part of why this matter had escalated to the level it had. Trevor Solis had flown in from Los Angeles that morning. He was dressed in the way that people dress when they want to signal that they are not from the place they are currently standing. Expensive sneakers, a jacket that costs more than most people's monthly rent, the kind of effortless style that takes considerable effort. He carried a leather portfolio, and he had the practiced confidence of someone who spent his professional life solving problems for people who created them at scale. He did not seem particularly concerned when he walked in. He looked around the courtroom with mild curiosity, the way you look around an airport in a city you've never visited and don't plan to return to. He found his place, he sat down, he checked his phone twice before a court officer addressed him, and he put it away with a particular energy of someone who was tolerating an inconvenience. When his name was called, he approached the bench and introduced himself without being asked. He stated his name, his role, his client's name, and the name of the management company he represented. He said it all in one smooth sentence, the way you lead with credentials when you want to establish the frame of a conversation before the other person can set it themselves. Judge Caprio looked at him. He looked at the file. He looked back at him. He asked Trevor Solis to walk him through what had happened during his client's visit to Providence. Trevor Solis nodded as if this were a reasonable starting point and began to explain. He said that large-scale touring productions had significant logistical demands. He said that the requirements of a show of that magnitude created circumstances that were sometimes difficult to reconcile with local ordinances that were designed for ordinary traffic conditions. He said that his team had been in contact with the venue and had made what he called good faith efforts to minimize disruption. He said that some of the citations reflected a misunderstanding between his advance team and local authorities about what had been prearranged. Judge Caprio listened to all of this without interrupting. He had a habit of letting people fully arrive at the end of their own explanation before he responded, because he believed that people revealed the most about themselves in the last few sentences when they thought the main argument was already made and they were just trailing off. He asked Trevor Solis about the fire hydrant specifically. He asked whether that had also been a logistical necessity. Trevor Solis said it was an oversight. He said with a convoy of that size, managing exact positioning was complex. He said his drivers were professionals, but that urban environments presented challenges. Judge Caprio said he understood that large vehicles in tight spaces created difficulties. He said he appreciated the acknowledgement that it was an oversight. And then he asked about the wheelchair access curb cut. He asked whether that was also an oversight. Trevor Solis said yes. He said he believed so. He said his team was not intentionally targeting accessibility infrastructure. Judge Caprio said he was glad to hear that. He asked about the noise ordinance violation. He asked whether the sound check timing had also been an oversight. And here Trevor Solis shifted slightly, not dramatically, just a small repositioning, a fractional change in his posture that preceded what he was about to say. He said that in the live music industry, sound checks were a technical necessity. He said that the permitted window the city had designated was, in his professional opinion, insufficient for a production of this scale. He said that his audio team needed more time to calibrate the system properly for the safety and quality of the show. He said that in markets where they regularly performed, these kinds of accommodations were standard. Judge Caprio asked him which markets those were. Trevor Solis named several large cities, places with major venues and long histories of hosting major tours. Judge Caprio nodded. He said that was interesting. He said he was curious about something. He said that in those markets, when his team determined that the permitted window was insufficient, what did they do? Trevor Solis said they worked with local authorities to extend the window or adjust the parameters. Judge Caprio asked whether that was what had happened in Providence. Trevor Solis paused. He said that the timeline had been compressed. He said there hadn't been adequate opportunity to go through that process. Judge Caprio said he understood. He moved to the disorderly conduct citation. He asked Trevor Solis about the member of the entourage who had received it and why it had gone unanswered. Trevor Solis said that individual was no longer with the organization. He said the situation had been addressed internally. He said he was prepared to settle the citation today on behalf of the former employee as a gesture of responsibility. Judge Caprio looked at him for a moment. Then he said something that shifted the temperature of the room. He said he wanted to ask a broader question. He said he wanted to step back from the individual violations for a moment and ask Trevor Solis directly how his organization approached the cities they visited. He said he was genuinely curious. He said it wasn't rhetorical. He said he wanted to understand the philosophy. Trevor Solis seemed to take this as an invitation to explain his world. He said that at the level his client operated, the production had needs that often exceeded what local infrastructure was designed to accommodate. He said that the show itself was an economic benefit to the city, generating revenue for hotels, restaurants, transportation, and the venue itself. He said that the relationship between a touring production and a host city was mutually beneficial and that both parties had to show flexibility. He said that his job was to make sure his client could perform at the highest level regardless of the environment. He said that sometimes that meant making decisions quickly that didn't perfectly align with every local regulation. He said, and this was the sentence that did it, he said that at the end of the day, the music industry operated by its own set of standards, and that in his experience, most jurisdictions understood that and made room for it. The courtroom was quiet. Judge Caprio did not respond immediately. He sat with what had just been said for a moment that felt significant. When he spoke, his voice was controlled in the way that voices are controlled when the person speaking them is making a deliberate choice about how much of what they feel to allow into their tone. He said he wanted to make sure he understood. He said he wanted to confirm what he had just heard. He asked Trevor Solis whether he was suggesting that the music industry operated by a different set of rules than the rest of society. Trevor Solis began to qualify. He said that wasn't exactly what he meant. He said he was talking about practical realities. Judge Caprio said he understood practical realities. He said he dealt with them every single day. He said the woman who had stood before him an hour ago with a parking ticket worked 2 jobs and took the bus and had received that ticket while dropping her kids at school because she had no other option and no other time. He said she hadn't suggested that her circumstances exempted her from the ordinance. He said she had stood there and taken responsibility. He said she was one of thousands of people who move through that city every day, each of them operating within the same framework of rules, the same traffic laws, the same noise ordinances, the same access requirements that existed to protect the safety and dignity of everyone in that community. He said that those rules were not suggestions. He said they were not obstacles invented to inconvenience touring productions. He said the fire hydrant regulation existed because people's homes and lives depended on emergency vehicles being able to reach them. He said the curb cut existed because human beings who used wheelchairs had a right to move through their city. He said the noise ordinance existed because the people who lived near that venue had lives that extended beyond the hours of a concert and deserved to exist within them without their homes being shaken. He said that no level of ticket sales, no number of sold-out arenas, no amount of economic benefit to a municipality changed any of that. He said that when Trevor Solis told him that the music industry operated by its own standards, what he was actually describing was a belief that certain people and certain enterprises were exempt from the obligations that everyone else carried. He said that belief was one of the most corrosive things he encountered in his courtroom. He said it showed up in different clothes, depending on who was wearing it. Sometimes it was wealth, sometimes it was fame, sometimes it was a leather portfolio and a flight from Los Angeles. But underneath it was always the same thing, the conviction that the rules were written for other people. He said he wanted Trevor Solis to hear him clearly. He said that in this room, there were no other people. There was just the law and the people it applied to, and it applied to everyone. Trevor Solis stood very still. The portfolio was at his side. The confidence he had walked in with had not exactly left him, but it had rearranged itself into something quieter and less certain. Judge Caprio went through each violation methodically. He applied fines to every citation. He addressed the disorderly conduct charge and made clear that settling it financially did not constitute the kind of accountability he believed the situation warranted, but that within his jurisdiction and his authority, the fine would be assessed and paid. He noted for the record that the accessibility violation was the one that concerned him most, and that he expected any future visits by this production to begin with a conversation with city authorities, not end with one. He said that Providence was not a backdrop. He said it was a city with residents who had rights and neighbors who had lives and a legal framework that existed to protect all of it. He said that any organization that wished to bring its production here was welcome to do so. He said the city benefited from live music and cultural events. He said he meant that genuinely. But he said they would come as guests who respected the place they were visiting, not as a traveling authority that superseded the one that existed here. Trevor Solis paid the fines. He did not say much. He said thank you to the clerk in the way that people say thank you when they are not entirely sure what they are thanking anyone for. He walked back through the gallery, past the rows of people waiting for their own cases, people with their own violations and their own stories and their own reasons for being in that room that morning. He flew back to Los Angeles that afternoon. The production did return to Providence the following year. The advance team was in contact with city authorities 6 weeks before the show. The convoy parked in a designated area 3 blocks from the venue. The sound check took place within the permitted window. The show sold out again in under 4 minutes. Someone from the venue mentioned it to a local reporter, the contrast between the 2 visits, and the reporter asked around and eventually reached someone who had been in the courtroom that morning. That person described what had happened, described what Judge Caprio had said, described the particular quality of his anger, which was not loud and not theatrical, but which had filled that room completely and left no space for anything else. The reporter asked what it felt like to be in there when it happened. The person thought about it. They said it felt like watching someone refuse to move, not out of stubbornness, not out of ego, but out of a complete and total certainty about what the ground beneath them was made of and what it was worth. They said it felt like watching someone hold something up that a lot of other things depended on without making a show of the effort, without asking for credit, just holding it. The way you hold something when you understand that putting it down is not an option.